I want to give a shout out to someone that I don't think is going to get that much attention in the sports media because so many people are afraid of covering this story because they don't want to upset LeBron or anybody in the NBA. But I want to give a shout out right now because he may be listening, or I bet there are some people listening who know him in Los Angeles because I know we have a lot of police officers who listen. I want to give a shout out to a man named Deon Joseph. He is a 24-year LAPD veteran, and he wrote an open letter to LeBron James that I thought was so well said that I wanted to read his open letter to you guys. And by the way, if Officer Joseph hears this, love to have him on the show to talk about his experience as an LA police officer over the last 24 years. Because when I read this, I was like, this is what needs to be happening. This is the kind of conversation that needs to occur. So, this is Deon Joseph responding to LeBron. All right, if you missed the story last week, LeBron called out a Columbus, Ohio police officer, demanded accountability in a shooting that happened in Columbus, Ohio. When all of the videos came out, unfortunately, what became clear was this police officer had almost no choice. This girl was about to stab to death, maybe, another girl. She had a big knife in her hand, and she was lunging towards an unarmed girl. The police officer had commanded her to drop the knife, to not be behaving in a violent fashion. And in a split second, he had to make a choice, life or death. Do I allow this girl to potentially stab the other girl? And he made, I think, the right choice, which was an unfortunate one, but he protected the innocent girl that was already about to be stabbed. So after that picture of that police officer and demanding accountability, LeBron deleted his initial tweet and then tried to say, oh, people were reacting to it in a negative way, so that's why I took it down. So that is the background for Deon Joseph, who is responding in an open letter to LeBron James, and I do think there could be something constructive to come out of this if LeBron were willing to listen to him. Just listen to this letter. Again, Deon Joseph, 24-year LA Police Department veteran. Here is Mr. Joseph's words. I am not going to, dear LeBron, I am not going to come at you from a place of hatred. There will be no name calling. I was raised to see the whole of a human being, not to hyper-focus on their flaws or make said flaws the whole of who they are. I'm an honest man. What you do for children and other acts of charity shows a huge heart. You show to be a family man, and that's to be respected. You play for the team my family has cheered for since the 1960s, then myself since 1979. But your current stance on policing is so off base and extreme. Your tweet that targeted a police officer in Ohio who saved a young woman's life was irresponsible and disturbing. It showed a complete lack of understanding of the challenge of our job in the heat of a moment. You basically put a target on the back of a human being who had to make a split-second decision to save a life from a deadly attack. A decision I know he and many others wish they never had to make, especially when it involves someone so young. I am reading the words of Deon Joseph, 24-year LA Police Department veteran, who wrote an open letter to LeBron James. You can read this for yourself at Outkick.com. Instead of apologizing, Officer Joseph said, you deflected. You said you took your tweet down because you did not want it to be used for hate when the tweet itself was the embodiment of hatred rooted in a lack of understanding of the danger of the situation. I don't know if this will ever reach you, but my hope is that one day I can sit down with you and talk. As a man of faith, I can have no hatred towards you, but I do feel I can help you understand the reality of the profession of policing and that there is another side you need to hear. You are tired of black folks dying. So am I. You hate racism and police brutality. So do I. But you cannot paint 800,000 men and women who are of all races, faiths, sexual orientations, and are also mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, preachers, coaches, community members, and just human with such a broad and destructive brush. Unlike some who have dug their heels in the belief that police are inherently evil, I think if you yourself actually sat down and had a real, honest, and open conversation with a cop, there's a strong chance you may discover we are not the monsters you have come to believe we are, who deserve the hate and disdain you have. And even if you come away feeling the same way, I could respect it, because at least you gave the other side your ear instead of only hearing one narrative. The offer is on the table, LeBron. No cameras, no fanfare, just two men who care talking. I know it's a long shot, but this division and hatred must stop. It's clear based on rising crime in marginalized communities that cops and the community need to build bridges to save lives on all sides. That cannot be done through the demonization of any group of people. Just putting it out in the universe, brother, even if not me, please take the time to talk to a police officer instead of judging them. No shade. Thanks for all the positive things you do. This, the work of Officer Deon Joseph, a 24-year veteran of the LA Police Department. And I just think to myself, as I read that police officer's words, how often have we heard athletes across our country demonize police? And how rarely have we heard anyone actually stand up for all the hardworking, good men and women across our country battling probably the toughest environment in any of their lives and being forced to do so with the least respect that has ever been given to law enforcement in any of our lives, I bet. I don't know that there's a harder job in America right now than police officer. I really mean that. And I guarantee you that there is a real difficulty in signing up police officers right now, because there's a lot of people out there that are going to think, why would I put myself in a position for the salaries that police officers make, which are not massive salaries? I'm going to put my life on the line, and I'm going to have to deal with profound disrespect from people across this entire country who have bought into the argument that we're awful people. I mean, think about this. They took cops off the air. For most of my life, we sat around, athletes, fans, regular guys and girls out there, and thanked police and other first responders for all the work they did on our behalf. And I got to tell you, I love this letter because I think we need a constructive dialogue to exist between policemen and athletes. Go back and think about how the culture has changed. Go back and watch The Last Dance. Do you know who Michael Jordan's best friends were? Former police officers. That's who he hung out with. He didn't have a big entourage that he was friends with. He hung out with police officers. A lot of them retired because he respected the work that they had done. And in that documentary, it seemed to suggest that a lot of those former police officers reminded Jordan of his dad. And I think about the difference in a relatively short period of time between respect that was shown for law enforcement and the lack of respect that we see now. And I also think about how if athletes really wanted to use their platform in a constructive way, one of the best things they could do is try to work to create a better relationship between police and citizens. And I think about that now because I've got a big audience. I got the biggest audience in the country when it comes to morning sports talk radio. And what I tell you guys is often the same thing that I tell my kids or family members. Imagine if every athlete came out and instead of demonizing police, imagine if instead of putting that police officer picture up and demanding accountability, imagine if LeBron had said, hey, I want to make a video. And in that video, I'm going to tell every kid out there who's a fan of mine, I want you guys to respect law enforcement. And when police make a request, I want you to comply with it immediately, not argue with it, not snap back at them, not insult them, not in any way create more tension in this relationship. I think it's likely that there would be thousands of more people alive today if that had been the message that athletes were sending for the past couple of years. Instead, many of our athletes and media figures as well, many people in my industry, have decided to demonize police. Are there bad police? 100%. But guess what? There are bad members of every profession in the country. If you put every single accountant on camera all day long, you would find out there are a lot of bad accountants. If you put every school teacher on camera all day long, you would find out there are a lot of bad school teachers, doctors, lawyers. Professions don't make people bad. Their choices do. And so every profession, doesn't matter what you do for a living, every single one of you listening right now, if I told you, hey, somebody has to get fired at your job, who's the worst at doing the job, every single one of you would immediately have a name that came to mind. And by the way, if you don't have one, it's you. If you're like, everybody's great at my job, they'd probably fire you. Because if you don't think somebody is not very good at the job, I would bet it's you that is the worst. And so imagine, I tell my kids all the time, this is me as a lawyer. Police are sometimes potentially going to tell you to do something that may not be legally appropriate. But you know what? The courts exist to determine whether or not a police officer's decision was appropriate. If you get arrested and you didn't do anything wrong, we will fight that to the high heavens. But you know what you have to be in order for that to happen? Alive. Almost without fail, in every situation that ends in violence with a police officer, if the person had complied and not fought back, and yes, sir, and no, sir, and yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am to the police officer, there would not have been a violent activity. That's what I tell my kids to do. 13-year-old, 10-year-old, 6-year-old. Police officer asks you a question, you respond, answer honestly, yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am. Police officer arrests you for some reason and you don't think you've done anything wrong. Police officer pulls you over for some reason and you don't think you've done anything wrong. Guess what? Your dad's a lawyer. We'll figure out what happened. But the worst thing you can do is argue with a police officer, fight with a police officer, disrespect a police officer. Most of the time, police officers are going to give you back the energy that you give them. That's not just true of police officers. That's true of most of the world. The energy that you give off, you usually get back. That's the way it works. And so I think the energy that this officer is giving off here is absolutely fantastic. Again, I encourage you to go read that article yourself. Officer Deon Joseph requesting, 24-year veteran of the LAPD, requesting a meeting with LeBron James to discuss LeBron James continuing to demonize police officers on our streets and the impact that that is having across the entire country. Constructive, not destructive dialogue, I think, is often the answer. Almost always.